And as a Christian, I'm there at the helm. I could take the boat in any direction I want, change the direction of my life if I want to. But Jesus is there just out of my line of sight, gently saying, Jerry, there are shoal waters to port, a bit more to starboard. And if I can listen and plug into him, then I will stay off the rocks and head in the right direction.
Well, welcome everybody. My name's Simon Gilbert and this is Inspired. And this week I'm very excited to have my good friend with me, Jerry Marshall. Welcome, Jerry.
Hi, great to be here.
So Jerry and I go back about 20 years. We met through the New Wine Network. He retired but found retirement too boring. And so he's recently taken on the leadership of Transformational Enterprise Network. And even this last summer, he very kindly let me loose on his canal boat without much training, and that was one of my highlights of experience of the summer, was going to this massive lot and clanging around, and the kids completely freaking out, seeing Daddy utterly out of control.
Luckily, it's solid steel, and there's not much that can go wrong. So, you're not the only person that's borrowed it. It's lovely to be able to share it.
Well, honestly, it does go down as a summer highlight. Anyway, that was just a reflection of your generosity in general, and you are, I don't know how to describe you, you're a sort of serial kingdom entrepreneur, and there's a whole lot in that, which we'll come to. So anyway, Jerry, let's get into it. Welcome. And so go back. You had an unusual childhood, didn't you?
Well, I suppose so. Of course, it seemed perfectly normal at the time. But I was born in Kuwait. My dad, I think, got a taste of the Middle East in the war, protecting the Persian oil fields. And my mum came out for a bit of adventure, I think, as a medical secretary. And they met, got married, had 3 kids, spent 20 years there. And for a kid, it was great. Unspoilt beaches, late night barbecues, swimming after dark, all that kind of stuff. And very cross-cultural. So I'm sure there was a lot of impact through that. Then I was sent off to boarding school at 8. And again, that seemed completely normal, to fly off to school and come back in the holidays. That's what everyone else did. That I knew. And then we moved back to England when I was 13. Parents concerned about our education, myself and my 2 sisters.
Sure. Any defining experiences from those early years?
School, I guess, that's probably where I learned that I really wanted to be an entrepreneur. There was a craze on pet rats at school, as you'd imagine. I was probably about 12 and I had a couple of rats. I named one Fiona after this girl that I fancied, thinking that would be a great move, that somehow she'd be touched, that I'd name my favourite rat after her. But it didn't work. I know that may sound surprising to you, Simon. It's very... Anyway, getting my head around the female psyche. But that provided a market opportunity because people weren't organised to have rat food for the whole term. And so some of these poor rats were starving. And I managed to persuade a tame teacher to buy rat food in bulk. And then I borrowed plastic cups from the dining hall and sold them at 5p a cup, which is a 100% margin. And it was a nice little business. Gradually in my teenage years, I realised that what I wanted to do was to follow in the footsteps of my uncle, who'd started a business and sold it and became very wealthy and moved to Malta for tax reasons. And I thought, that's it. I want to become fabulously wealthy. That's my life plan. Mm-hmm. The other really important defining moment was I was in the bottom stream at one point, and I can remember crying because I was last in the form. Basically, I wasn't actually doing much work, I think, but I don't think I realised that. And then I had this crazy idea that in order to be a fabulously wealthy entrepreneur, I needed to go to Cambridge to do economics. So I started to get up an hour earlier than anyone else and actually work on it. And I did get in. It was probably a bad year for the college I went to or something. But anyway, I did manage to scrape into Cambridge, have a brilliant time, got slightly distracted by development economics, got really interested in that, even though that was not part of the life plan. But that was a defining experience,
Just to say, Jerry, I'm listening and I'm thinking, I so want my boys to listen to this podcast because their dream, age 12 and 15 right now, is pretty much stated to be fabulously wealthy as well. And yet they are not of the types to get up an hour early to try and get into Cambridge. They are serious slackers. So I'll get them onto this podcast.
Life goals, that's the lesson. Right. Life goals are important.
Carry on.
So in view of the life plan, I joined, actually got a well-paid job with a fast-growing high-tech engineering company in a place called Coventry, which was way further north than I'd ever been before. So I thought I'll learn the ropes, then I can set up my own business. The only thing was that I didn't know anyone in Coventry, and everyone in the engineering company seemed quite old, in their 40s or higher, which was pretty old, I thought at the time. So I discovered that there was a church next to Warwick University that had lots of students. And I thought, here's the cunning plan. It's an Anglican church, so obviously it'd be very boring, but they have coffee after the service and I could chat up some nice girls from Warwick University.
And was this literally your first experience of Christendom?
No, I'd been to church as a kid. I'd never been voluntarily as an adult. So it was the first time I'd been to church as an adult. My younger sister had become a Christian in a kind of gap year in Peshawar, and she was praying for me. So there was stuff happening in the background. And someone had read Cross and the Switchblade and God's Smuggler, Brother Andrew, who I later met in Bethlehem, amazing guy. And that had planted some seeds that I couldn't quite get rid of. So, encouragement for those that think that the seeds they're planting have no impact. So I went into Westwood Church and was surprised to be warmly welcomed, and even more surprised to discover that, people actually thought that God answered prayers. I thought, well, that's pretty weird. There was this guy, lovely guy, who'd just been made redundant, wife, mortgage, 3 kids, and yet he was at peace about it because God was going to provide the next thing. So that's really weird. So someone said you should read John's Gospel. So I did. And I think what came over reading that for the first time as an adult was that this was an eyewitness account because the women came out so well in a very patriarchal kind of society, because the disciples looked such idiots. Why would you include that if you'd made it up? And especially because, there are these guys who were frightened to heck when Jesus is arrested. And then a few weeks later, they totally changed. They were willing to die, and sometimes in pretty horrible ways, to defend this message that Jesus had risen from the dead. And I thought, what had they seen? What could they have seen that makes that much change? And so it began to fall into place. And so February 1980, a few months after starting this first job, I prayed the prayer. I committed myself to Jesus, and I think I knew that was going to have a big impact. That wasn't just a temporary thing.
And was it all, was it a massive change overnight, or were you already a pretty nice guy and there wasn't much of a discernible difference?
Oh, I was a horrible guy, yeah. It's sneaky, kind of, no, I don't think I was a good person. I know I was probably quite nice, but pretty loose morals. I wrote a book, and my kids don't like chapter 2 because it's so dodgy. It's the kind of traditional bit about how horrible I was before I became a Christian. But some things changed overnight. Yeah, I think God had this kind of agenda. Money, sex, and power is the sort of summary that He needed to work through to change my life, and that the sex bit was the first one, really. And in fact, before I became a Christian, I starting to ask questions. Said, "Okay, God, if you exist, if I become a Christian, do I have to stop sleeping with my girlfriend?" And she was the person that I thought was, the one, and all of that, even though I was looking for, other female company. So that shows what kind of guy I was. Yeah. Anyway, I opened the Bible at random and put my finger on a verse, because that's the only way I could think of getting God's guidance. And it was on a verse in Corinthians that said, "Don't you know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit?" And it went on, probably the only bit that could really say, actually, you need to change. So
you were nailed.
Yeah. So that change happened. And then things started going a bit rocky in our relationship, and I was part of a home group, and I got them to pray about our relationship, because that's what you do just before I was going to see this girl one weekend. And so I knew I was okay because people were praying for it. I went to see her and she chucked me. I was shocked. Surely it shouldn't be that way around. And I was really upset, and I went back home and I knelt by my bed and I banged the bed with my fist and cried and so on. And I was quite angry with God, really, that he hadn't answered the prayer. And thankfully, God, he's okay with anger. And of course, God had better plans, I think, for both of us. That became apparent.
That you'd end up meeting the lovely Sue. Maybe you'll share. Do you want to share that story?
Yeah, well, she was the Warwick University student at Westwood, so that kind of plan worked. And I can remember someone preaching a sermon about, really directed at men, marry someone with a stronger faith than you. And Sue had been a Christian since she was a young teenager. And I think the first memory I had was picking her up and throwing her into a ditch, as you do before a service. Anyway, she came into my life. I took her across the channel with some other people. So she had the kind of sailing test, which she passed with flying colours. And there was a very clear guidance. In fact, we separated at one point, kind of long story, but I was praying if Sue's the one, that she would still be here after she graduated. She wouldn't leave Coventry, and she was going to go to Liverpool. But in the space of 1 week, she was turned down from Liverpool. She went to inquire about an MA at Warwick, and she was immediately offered a grant and a place. And then she asked about accommodation, and someone immediately offered accommodation. It just kind of all came together. Right. So it's really encouraging to know she, particularly when things are more of a struggle, to know actually Sue was the person that God wanted me to marry. And 40 years next year, so it's been a while
to be celebrated. Yeah. So you talk about money, sex, power. We sort of covered the sex. Give us the money. What did you learn there?
I guess money was the big one, really, because I think money's a great thing, isn't it? It's a means of exchange. It's a store of value, terrific invention. And for most people, it's a valuable tool, and that's it. But for some people, and I would have been in this number, it can become an addiction. And I think I was heading in that direction. Not just, it's not so much money in itself, but it's what it was demonstrating. And particularly economics at Cambridge, there's a set of expectations on myself and from other people and from myself to follow a certain career trajectory. And money was a way of demonstrating my success. So I needed to escape from that. And I knew when I became a Christian, I'd have to give some money away. You know, that was the cost. And I kind of figured out that about £10 a month was the minimum I could just about get away with.
It's a bit tight.
Well, absolutely, very tight. And even then I was thinking, oh gosh, £120, that's about the same as my sailing club subscription. You know, that's how I was comparing it. So God needed to work on that. And I was a counsellor at a mission a few months after I became a Christian. And the preacher, Ian Knox, who was part of our church, great guy, was talking about giving and how tithing is just the starting point. You know, actually, if you just tithe, that isn't even giving. Giving is what happens after that. And I was very convicted by that. And then I had a possibility of a new job, and I prayed if I get that job, then I'll have the salary rise that will enable me to increase it. And there was a kind of breakthrough, I suppose, maybe around £30-40 a month, where it went from being, this is really hard, to actually, it's exciting that I'm able to give more. And God really had to break that hold that money had on me. And that happened fairly quickly.
Excellent. Just a few times in our lives we felt the Lord say, give away, a stack load that just didn't make sense. And I suppose our testimonies, I'm sure it's your testimony that the Lord, you reap what you sow, and never regretted it, and it's always boomerang back in abundance, and that is kingdom provision, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'd sort of struggle getting the balance with prosperity theology and all of that, and God's blessing isn't that direct relationship. But I have experienced that, and actually much later on in the story, there was a time when we didn't have a lot of savings. We had a bit, and someone phoned me up and said, I urgently need 10 Christians to give us 5k each, because this project I'd visited in Cambodia that was working with people who'd come out of trafficking, women who'd been trafficked, they're about to go bust. I need to go and sort them out. I need some immediate money to help. And I was thinking, I was about to sell hoping to sell a business, and that had all gone pear-shaped. And I was thinking, if only I'd been able to sell the business, I'd be able to do that.
Yeah.
And then I felt God say, well, actually, you do have £5,000. It may be a fair chunk of your savings, but why not? So I phoned this guy back and said, yeah, I could help. He was asking me to recommend people who could help.
Mm-hmm.
And within a couple of weeks, my business partner phoned up and said, we'd like to buy you out. And he came up with a generous deal, and it was all done. And I really feel that there was a connection between the two, that God was testing me. Give before you have the money, or at least the surplus, if you like, and he will bless that.
Amen. Yeah, by the way, I'm glad you picked me up on what I said, because it could have sort of hinted at prosperity doctrine. I'm so not a believer in that, having experienced it absolutely horrifically in Africa, as people have manipulated the poor to...
Oh, yes, I've seen that in Africa.
We've all seen abuses, haven't we, on that level?
Yeah, but it's a balance, isn't it? You can easily have a kind of poverty mentality, and I think our kids at one stage had that. I've got 3 lovely, amazing daughters, and I think because we had very little money early on, that there's a little bit of poverty mentality in them, and it's easy to have that, isn't it? That somehow that's super spiritual, but the blessings of the kingdom of God are amazing. So getting that balance between not going in the wrong direction of prosperity theology, but also not of that kind of poverty mentality is quite difficult.
Yeah. So you're a growing disciple. God's dealing with you in the area of sex, money, and now power. What was the power sort of aspect?
I suppose for me that's really about status that I hinted at before, and this kind of, here is the career trajectory that is expected of me. I was made redundant twice in the first few years of my career. The first time was because I prayed, Lord, I'm a bit bored with this job. I want something exciting to happen. And then I was made redundant. I was like, what? I didn't mean that exciting. But I was, given a reasonable offer, and it was fine. I got another job. But the second time, Sue had just given birth to our first child, and she'd given up work. And we moved to a house with a new and excitingly large mortgage. And suddenly I was made redundant at 1 week's notice. The whole company was taken over. It was all a bit dodgy, in fact. And we had, nothing really in terms of savings. The church were amazing. Someone put £400 in cash through the letterbox anonymously. Another family gave us 50 quid a month, and, for as long as we needed it. And it was actually a real time of closeness to God. Stu and I went to the Cotswolds to pray and fast and try and figure out what God was saying. And we both felt that God was saying, wait. But having said that, in that situation, it seemed, wait, yes, but surely I can just push a few doors and see what happens. That seems reasonable. It's a very Christian thing to do, isn't it? So I applied for a job and got offered this fabulous job. It was about a 40% pay rise, marketing manager in a much bigger company. Everything I could possibly want in terms of career trajectory. And Sue said, I'm not sure. And I was quite irritated. Well, obviously, this is the right step. Yeah. I pushed the door, it's opened wide. And I said, I think slightly crossly, okay, God, I've got 24 hours to decide. So you're going to have to tell me in my next Bible study. And the next Bible study was that passage in Matthew. What good is it if a man gains the whole world, yet forfeits his soul? And that just really got to me. The company was a bit of a selling your soul kind of outfit. And so I plucked up courage, phoned up for more time to decide. And then I pulled out. And I didn't tell my parents because it was like, this is nuts. But I thought, I want to stay off the dole. So I bought an Amstrad PCW and wrote 10 letters, one of which was to World Vision. And they replied and said, yeah, we want to hire you 5 days a week for a few months. And I said, great, but let's do 4 days a week so I can find other customers. And that was the beginning of a temporary business that actually lasted 25 years or so, and became a platform for a load of other things.
Wow. You alluded to temptations in the workplace and potentially, stumbling spectacularly. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, so it's easy to say, God dealt with money, sex and power, and then absolutely everything was fine. But of course, it's still an ongoing process. And we've talked about money and the moving beyond tithing as that became possible. And I think I realised now tithing was a bit of a kind of Roman cop-out when Christianity became the state religion. Sharing everything, having everything in common was just too radical, and that's kind of a new mindset. So God's continuing to push me forward. And in terms of sex, well, I remember hearing Care for the Family, Rob Parsons, talking about the need to stay faithful, and saying what stuck in my mind was, having an affair is not when you jump into bed with someone. Actually, it starts at the very beginning. And that was a really useful lesson, because there have been 2 or 3 times when very nice women have apparently really liked me, which is very flattering, when you're a middle-aged bloke. And it's tempting. And I can remember picking up the phone and thinking, I'll just phone this person because I hadn't seen her at church for a while. I wonder if she's all right. And then realising that could be the beginning of a slippery slope. What would happen as a result of that phone call? Maybe she'd say, come over a cup of coffee or whatever. And I put the phone down. It's so easy to make an apparently innocent decision, or you can convince yourself it's innocent, but behind that is something else, and the beginning of a slippery slope. So, it's something you have to keep on your guard. And I've had for years an accountability partner with a transparent relationship or an accountability group, so that I can, be open about those issues and be accountable to someone else, and to keep on the straight and narrow.
Yeah, so important, isn't it? We see an endless sort of litany of spectacular car wrecks, car crashes of high-profile people in ministry, and if it's going to happen, if it can happen to them with an apparent massive influence and anointing and gifting, then it can happen to any of us, can't it? It's very
absolutely
sobering. So, likewise, I'm always banging the drum on accountability. Glad you got that in place. Hey folks, I hope you're enjoying the podcast. I'm loving the response we're getting from across the world. It's just wonderful to see how encouraging and inspiring it is being and hitting the spot. Listen, if you are being blessed by it, I'd love it. Basically, this happens under the auspices of our ministry, Great Lakes Outreach, which works in the poorest and the hungriest country in the world, which is Burundi. We're having an incredible impact in the toughest of circumstances. We want to carry on supporting those local folks doing a great job. So if you wanted to, greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. You could make a donation there. I'd so appreciate it. Also, it's word of mouth, isn't it? So gossip these podcasts to other people, get them to subscribe, give us a great review. Absolutely wonderful. So grateful to you. So that's greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. If you want to do a monthly, a couple of quid a month, or a one-off donation, we'd be incredibly grateful. All right, now let's get back to the podcast. So, I picture you as a sort of a pioneer and adventurer, and I think the most exciting thing for me that you've been involved in, because I can, we've done some business ventures in Burundi, and it's so hard in where the rule of law and the rules of engagement in general are not the same, and corruption is a whole sort of different level to the West. Tell us about the whole Bethlehem experience.
Yeah, that came out of a guy who came to a lunch at church, Salim Manaya, who ran a reconciliation ministry called Masalaha. He's Palestinian, married to a Brit, the lovely Kay from Bolton. Small world, because his son is a friend of ours, and when we went to Israel, he took us into Bethlehem, and it was fascinating hearing it from a local and an Arab Christian's perspective, as all these tourists blasted past, through without having to wait 6 hours to get into. Yeah, it was very interesting. Brilliant family, and great ministry, and typically taking out Israelis and Palestinians, pairing one Israeli, one Palestinian up with a camel and getting them trekking across the desert. So camels are horrible things, and yes. One of them's riding it, one of them's leading it. So the camel kind of becomes the common enemy, and they get to know each other in the face of the common enemy. And as a result, they can then share their political differences over the campfire later. Ingenious. But anyway, he arrived, it must have been about 1994, Oslo, peace process, lots of exciting things happening. And I had a real heart for Palestine and the Middle East because of my connections there, that kind of cross-cultural childhood. Mm-hmm. And I said, what can I do as a business person? And so I started this marketing consultancy business, and actually other things had come out of that. And he said, oh, well, come on out. So I did. I went out, I visited 22 companies and all the chambers of commerce, including the one in Gaza, talked to lots of people, just asking what is it that I could do that would help. And they all wanted help with exports. And so I managed to get a grant from the British consulate and bring some consultants out. And we helped companies in Bethlehem develop their exports. And the idea was then replicate it in Hebron and Nablus and Gaza. But then everything went pear-shaped, and the suicide bombings and bus bombings all happened. Hamas was elected. Yeah. So it kind of came to an end. And I was kind of wondering, so what was that all about, God? Then cut forward to 2004. 2004, both my parents died a few months apart, and it felt like a new era. And I went to New Wine, really deliberately saying to God, so what do you want me to do now? And I felt that he was saying, I've already told you, I've called you to Palestine. That's where you need to be. And at the same New Wine, I met up with Transformational Business Network, and they were about taking business people out to countries, typically in Africa and Asia, to use their business skills to alleviate poverty. And so I joined TBN and took a group of business people out to Bethlehem, to kind of start again, really. And we had lots of meetings in 4 days, 18 meetings in 4 days, people from very different views, from both sides. And one of those meetings was with a guy called Nassim, who said, I've been waiting for people like you to come back, and I will organise some guys and women to meet up. Let's have a workshop to figure out how we could create robust jobs that will survive in peace or conflict, that would survive in a curfew, would survive in an intifada. That's what we need. 50% youth unemployment. That will be the source of hope and all of that stuff. So I came back February 2005 with a couple of business people, lovely different people. One of them is now a vicar, and he was the kind of prayer person, listening to what God was saying. Because I'm an activist. I just want to get on with it. And it's good to have people like that around me. And Nassim's big idea was to set up a call centre, which kind of is not exactly what you think of as, it's not probably the first thing you thought of in Burundi as the need. But Bethlehem has lots of international schools because of its status in Christianity. People speak good English. They're mostly bilingual and other languages. And we were looking for an invisible export, something that couldn't be stopped by the wall. Perishable goods get stopped and rot, and breakable goods like ceramics get chucked into containers and broken for security reasons and all of that. So that was the plan. And the only thing was, Nassim and I knew nothing about call centres at all. So we started to explore it with an Israeli, actually quite a remarkable connection with an Israeli call centre company, open to a partnership. But ultimately that fell apart really for political reasons. And it's, again, so what are you saying, God? And there's another gap. Things don't happen as fast as, activists like you and I want them to happen. I'm sure you've experienced that. Anyway, I ended up leading a Transformational Business Network for various reasons and organising a conference in Dubai. And I met a guy there who was running, an American Christian, running the Gulf Bank call centre in Kuwait. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Do you want to meet my mate in Bethlehem? And amazingly, he came over. We met in a restaurant in Bethlehem. And through that, we then started to seriously develop it. I applied for a grant via my UK company with the Dutch government, their PSI it's called. They were going to provide 60% of the capital costs. And I can remember, cut forward to a phone call from this guy in Holland who told me, really good news, you've got this grant. And on the phone, I said, oh, that's brilliant, really good news. I'm really excited by that. But in my heart, I was thinking, oh, heck. Suddenly this happy talk, which I can impress people with, is actually I'm going to have to put some serious money in myself. We're talking tens of thousands of pounds. Well, anyway, the three of us put in some money, borrowed a load of money, and we had this grant, about $100,000 or so from the Dutch government, and built this 88-seat call centre. The team worked so hard building this thing. It is as you kind of alluded to, it's so easy setting up a company in the UK. You go online, you pay 30 quid and it's done. It's much more complicated in Palestine. And things like you can't just buy an office building. You tend to buy shells or rent shells, and then you have to do it up. And, we had to have, the risk analysis was not like anyone in the UK.
Yeah.
We had fiber optic and backup microwave internet connections, generators, backup generators, miles and miles of Cat6 cabling. And then the big issue is the chicken and egg problem. So do you get guarantees of work from customers and then build a centre, or do you build a centre and hope you get the customers, which is what we eventually did. And we had a great cash flow. It was all going to work brilliantly, except that we didn't get the sales targets that we were hoping to get. And we were losing $10,000, $15,000 a month. We employed the first 20 people it was April 2012, and trained them up. We were ready to go. But the big contract was always 2 weeks ago. For months and months, it was always 2 weeks away. So we were losing a load of money, and should by rights have gone bust in early 2013. And I was traipsing around Ramada trying to find a venture capitalist. And I think it was only, it was God. I was kind of praying, God, what, your glory is at stake. Everyone knows it's set up by three Christians. And amazingly, a VC company stepped in, a company that wanted to create jobs, and they provided the money we needed to bring in a senior management team and really get the thing going. And everything started to fall in together. It's still 2 or 3 years before we made profits, but all these years on, we've got 155 staff. It's profitable.
Wonderful.
We've grown a software unit as well, so it's not just the call center. We do things differently from normal, call centers in Bangladesh in terms of staff relations, barbecues. We pay above the average salary. It's an impact business. So the prime purpose was to create jobs and skills and relationships across the divide, and model integrity and gender equality. The first CEO was a woman, a lovely woman, who then did an MBA in Switzerland. So I can't take the glory. I think that was what it was all about, really. Jerry, you can't take the glory for this. This is God.
Amen.
If you'd been in charge, it would have gone bust. So very much God's glory.
Yes.
And we're now, next stage, get to 1,000 staff. So it's an ongoing journey.
Jerry. So wonderful. You say 155 staff, and that could be a statistic, but I know from my context, when we did our conference centre and it's 53 staff, that was 53 husbands or wives, dads or mothers with their 4, 5, 6 kids to feed. And that job enables them to go to school, to pay their rent, to be secure, to have peace. And the ripple effects of job creation is just massive. And I know, you've given us a decent level of detail there. That's the levels of sort of hassle you've been through, and just hang on in there, and ultimately God having to bail you out, and that's it, isn't it? It's all for his glory. It's just wonderful. So I just
absolutely, and you're right, it has an impact beyond the employees, all that kind of wider family, and actually beyond. People do amazingly, they do leave and move to other companies, but they come to other companies with a better understanding of English, a better understanding of sort of Western concepts of customer care, and all sorts of benefits for the broader economy. It's been an amazing ride.
John Piper has this line about retirement. He says, don't think about coasting in self-indulgence from retirement to the grave. Now, does that appeal to you, coasting in self-indulgence? What's your retirement looking at right now?
Well, I tried that for a little bit, a few weeks, maybe a few months. I'm not sure I was entirely coasting, but I got bored of that. And I've set up a number of, there was also an inner city thing in Coventry and some other businesses. I like setting up new things. My little bit of the jigsaw is kind of give me a blank sheet of paper and a vision to buy into, and I'll make it happen. That's what I really enjoy doing. And typically after a few years, I kind of get bored. So I set up a technology company, and year 3, we brought in someone else to be a CEO. We gave him a third of the business and said, right, you take charge. and managed to work my way out of that. And that also gave me the finances to retire and to work without needing payment. So that's opened lots of doors, which is brilliant. So the latest venture has been something called Transformational Enterprise Network, which is kind of TBN, the earlier thing, Mark II, with TBN's encouragement. That's been mothballed in the UK. So trying to create a community of Christians who want to use their skills to alleviate poverty in a way that's sustainable. So we're doing some fun things in Uganda. Picked up a young, enthusiastic Christian entrepreneur who probably didn't have the wherewithal to contact the larger agencies. You know, we could take a punt and provide financial mentoring and business training for. He's running a vocational training thing, so we've got business trainers to come in and train them to set up businesses. Just yesterday, I was looking through the 4 business plans that come through our weeding out process from 8 to 4, and we've got a funder who's prepared to provide small loans to enable these small businesses in the poorest part of Africa to start and to begin to take people on. So that's been fun, and you know there are lots of other areas where over the years I've had an involvement. I love combining different things. I know you probably had experience of that in Burundi and the breadth of your stuff. But you know, entrepreneurship and church leadership, you know, great combination. How can we really fulfill the Great Commission without entrepreneurial skills and risk taking within that mix? You know, I think the institutional church has become very risk averse, and to some extent, you know, that's understandable, and I'm not complaining about safeguarding. Obviously we have to have that and all of that, but hey, you know, the church in Acts was such a risk-taking church, and we've lost that. So there needs to be someone in the mix saying, hey, let's do it, let's move forward. So that's part of my mission, hidden mission.
And you mentioned a few times your affinity for sailing.
Yes.
You've had some sort of high-risk ventures there, haven't you?
Oh, I love sailing. Sailing is such a great way to completely get away, to be refreshed, and to get to know people. I've taken loads of people out. I used to organise church groups with up to 3 boats and 30 people crossing the channel and stuff like that. Actually anything in boats, and now we live by the river, and we've got, as you know, the narrowboat, and that's a guest room, and people can come and stay. So it's also been a great learning experience. Sailing a sinking boat across the channel was a fun experience. But I think there are some analogies in sailing which I find helpful. One is, you know, the rudder, the thing you steer with at the back, that only works when you're moving forward. And for me, I find I hear God best when I'm beginning to move forward. I can feel his steer. And I'm not sure there's any theological backing for that. But rather than just wait while anchored, push forward and see what God is saying. But also I had a really extraordinary experience quite early in my married life, which I think is a picture of being a Christian, which might be a good story to tell. I had chartered a Sadler 26, which is a 26-foot, a pretty small sailing boat with a twin keel, which is significant because they don't go upwind quite so well. And we had a young couple, and me and Sue. Sue was expecting first child, and we sailed from Falmouth to the Isles of Scilly, had a brilliant holiday in the Isles of Scilly, and then we needed to head back, but the wind was against us, and it was strong, and there was massive, the waves were kind of about halfway up the mast or so on. Because the wind was against us, we weren't making very good progress. It was behind the schedule. We missed the tides. We were fighting against the tide, and we ended up sailing all night. And because Sue was pregnant and the others were seasick, I was at the helm the whole night, so I couldn't plot my position. So basically, I was lost in the English Channel in some fairly rocky waters. There's some very nasty rocks called the Manacles, a mile off the Lizard Peninsula, graveyard to many ships. But it was a very kind of spiritual experience, and I can remember thinking and praying, Lord, the wind is so strong, I'm worried that the mast will come down. You know, please, can you bring the wind down a bit? And it kind of did. And then it dropped so much, we weren't powering through the waves. And I was praying, Lord, actually, I could do with a little bit more wind to take us through these oncoming waves. And that happened about 3 times in the early part of the night. And it was just weird. Is this really happening? And then at 1 o'clock in the morning, I felt this really clear message come into my brain: go on to 0 degrees magnetic, due north magnetic now. And it was so kind of clear that I did. I tacked round due north.
And that makes sense. That makes no sense, does it, in general?
No, absolutely. No, I mean, crazy. I mean, that's putting people's lives at risk. But I just sensed God, strongly sensed God was in that. And a few hours later, as it started to become light, it was probably about 5 a.m, Sue came out of the cabin, and I hadn't noticed. She said, "Oh, what's that boy over there?" There was a marker buoy. And we were about a mile outside the Outer Manacles marker, exactly where you'd be in perfect conditions, clear of the Manacles rocks. And in those days, this is before GPS, dead reckoning in strong tides is difficult to be accurate. And when you see your final destination, always you changed course to the final destination. But on this case, I just kept steering that. I could see a Falmouth light, and I kept steering this due north magnetic, and that course took us right through the middle of Falmouth Harbour. And for me, that seems to be not just an amazing miracle, but and a relief. But actually, that seems to me what Christian life is about. If we listen to God, then he will keep us off the rocks and get us into safe harbour. And it's like, being a Christian, I help to teach people sailing, and they're on the helm, and I'm standing behind them, just out of their line of sight, quietly saying, actually a bit more to starboard or whatever. And I feel that's like, as a Christian, I'm there at the helm. I could take the boat in any direction I want. I can change the direction of my life if I want to. But Jesus is there just out of my line of sight, gently saying, Jerry, there are shoal waters to port, a bit more to starboard. And if I can listen and plug into him, then I will stay off the rocks and head in the right direction. So that's my kind of picture of what faith is all about.
That's really helpful. So coming into land, you're as a seasoned sailor looking back, what sort of advice would you give your younger self?
I think a good question, yes. So many things I wish I'd known when I started out. But I suppose my summary would be connect to God. Secondly, connect to others. And I think I really got this. Diverse thinking. It doesn't matter if you're not very smart. If you're surrounded by people with different frames of reference, coming at it in different directions, then as a group, you are really smart. And that's where real breakthroughs happen, and exciting things happen. And thirdly, take a risk. There was a survey apparently years ago of older people saying, what do they regret? And the most common answer was, I wish I'd taken more risk in my life. People get into nice stable jobs, good pensions, and they never do what they really wanted to do, or perhaps what God is calling them to do. So take more risk. It's fun. You can have an adventure.
Amen. Anyone listening there? Are you listening right now? And is God saying, come on, what's the risk? What's the adventure? You should be going on with me. And there are plenty of people who say no, and those who say no are rewarded by the safety of existing, whereas those who say yes are rewarded by the adventure of living. I don't know who I'm quoting there, but I've used that before. Anyway, listen, time's up, Jerry, but just a few things you want to plug.
There's Travels with an Inflatable Elephant, which is partly about fighting HS2 unsuccessfully, but great fun, arguing with Pete Waterman on BBC Breakfast. Then I've rewritten a couple of times a business startup course. So if you really would like to start your own business, small business, or you'd like to help other people in your church or your group to set up your own business, there's a free resource at mindyourownbusiness.uk, free workbook you can work through, get around the table with a couple of friends and work through section 2 of the workbook, 10 sections, and figure out what business to start and whether it's going to be viable before you actually put money into it. So mindyourownbusiness.uk. And if you're interested in being part of a community with an accountability group and using your business skills to fight poverty, then take a look at 10community.net, TEN community.net.
I would love business folks, those wired that way, to be listening right now and want to engage with transformational enterprise network. So 10.net. Do get in touch with Jerry through that. Listen, Jerry, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much.
Brilliant. Lovely to be with you.
And everybody, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you've been inspired. I've been inspired. And next week, we're going to have another fantastic guest. So do join us again. In the meantime, can you spread the word? Can you give us a great review on iTunes, wherever you listen to this? If you want to be in touch with me, it's simongilbert.com or any of the social media platforms. And we will see you next week. All right, toodaloo.